Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly MMA Cycles Market Update. Today is Wednesday, November 19th, 2025. I'm Gianni Giapochi, your host, and I'm joined this week by the one and only Derek Panaia. Derek, how's it going today?
Everything's great, Gianni. Thanks for having me on again. I always love to be here.
Well, it's always great to have you on, and we have a lot to talk about in these markets. We're falling in stocks right now into a pretty potent period of geocosmic activity. Obviously, Mercury is retrograde right now, so the trickster is doing its thing. I have to say it's pretty interesting this year because we've had stocks kind of fall into important bottoms, so it seems, during all of the Mercury retrograde periods. I mean, obviously, when we had that market low on April 7th, that was the day Mercury went direct. And then, even if you're looking at this low from back in the beginning of August, that was during a Mercury retrograde period as well. And now we have another one. So, the trickster, very important this year. That's not all we're here to talk about, but I do want to get your take on what's going on here in stocks because, this is the longest drop and the sharpest drop that we've had in a few months here. And so, what are you looking at here in terms of the structure of this market? Do you think there's more weakness on the table, or do you think we're getting close to a bounce?
And you brought up a good point, this longest drop. And I looked at it another way yesterday and made note to everybody that, this is the first time we've started closing and have closed now several days below the 40-day moving average
Yeah.
since that April bottom. So since we've moved above that 40 average, we have tested it several times. We have not closed below it, but now we are closing below it. So the structure has definitely changed a little bit. That upside momentum has definitely waned. And it started with a very obvious indicator a few days ago or last week when we had the intermarket divergence. You had the
Yes.
Dow in a new all-time high. The Nasdaq and S&P did not follow suit, and that was a very loud warning that there could be trouble on the horizon for bulls in the stock market. And we've seen that. And until that intermarket divergence is negated, until the Nasdaq and the S&P both make new all-time highs, I think you have to lean to the bearish side. I'm not chasing the market down here, but I think on rallies, getting short and keeping a tight stop above that level is a good low risk play until the market is showing some signs of, renewed uptrend, renewal here. And actually yesterday too, I saw some internals that lead me to believe we're going to get a little short-term bounce, maybe a day or two. And as you mentioned, we're in Mercury retrograde, and this Mercury retrograde has been very, as Mercury should be, very quick reversals out of nowhere, catching everybody, in confused positions. And we've got a little more of that to go to the end of November. So, I don't think that's going to change. So, but if you've been following the strategy of Mercury retrograde and, selling, 1 or 2 day rallies and buying 1 or 2 day dips, you could have done pretty well.
Indeed, it's worth pointing out also that when Mercury went retrograde, a couple of days later, Jupiter also went retrograde, and Jupiter being the ruler of Sagittarius, Mercury's retrograde started in the sign of Sagittarius. So Mercury already, doesn't really fit in comfortably in the sign of Sagittarius, and then the planet that rules Sagittarius, Jupiter being a planet that rules exaggerations and whatnot, also turning retrograde a couple of days later. You could see how you had that widening trading range, that wider volatility. But then yesterday you had Mercury retrograde back into the sign of Scorpio. So now it's a different type of Mercury retrograde than we had from the start of that motion. But, we also started off this week with a grand trine between the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then next week, you actually have a grand trine between Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn on the 26th. So maybe that'll kind of lighten the mood up a little bit. You are seeing the Nasdaq lead today to the upside. You've not been seeing the Nasdaq and tech stocks really lead all that much. In fact, there's been a massive rotation taking place. You've been seeing a lot of biotechnology stocks do a lot better compared to tech. And that's just what I'm seeing kind of like internally at the Nasdaq level. But I'm completely with you in the sense that until we see the S&P and the Nasdaq hit a new all-time high, a reasonable degree of caution needs to be exercised, and I would say it's new all-time highs or bust for stocks at this point.
Absolutely. And you did mention we do have those important reversal dates. We're
Yeah.
we're approaching that orb or just getting into that orb now. And next week, time-wise, as it feels right now, would be a really nice time to see a bottom formation.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Let's go ahead and shift gears and take a look at what's going on in bonds. This has been a really interesting market because you've been hearing, oh, hey, rates are coming down, the economy is slowing down, the labor market's got some issues, and normally that would be an environment for bonds to rally, but we've not really we've seen bonds trending up for the majority of this year, but we haven't really seen bulls assert themselves. Now, I just wrapped up the forecast 2026 analysis for bonds. I do think we're going to see an important high in bonds in 2026. But how do you see this playing out here in the near term, Derek? Because you're kind of hanging out near these lows. We're still early enough in the cycle where bulls can make something happen. But is there anything that you're watching, particularly in bonds?
Yes, more so in notes. And we do have a conservative long position on now. The market has been caught in a consolidation since the end of October, and the range is pretty tight. I've made note a few weeks ago that there was a huge open interest in T-note future calls starting at 113. So the
Oh, wow.
113, the 113 and a half, the 114 in December have massive open interest. And look at every time we've gotten over 113, it's been short-lived and it's
Yeah.
been met with a lot of selling, which is probably those option sellers defending their position. They go off the board on Friday. So I'm trying to think of how this plays out because as much as there is talk of lower rates, the long end isn't cooperating. But
Yeah.
I do think get one more pop higher. It could be short-lived. I've lowered the objective down to about 113.18 versus December T-note futures. So that is an area I think we would highly recommend that our clients take profits at. And aggressive traders would need to start looking at the short side from there. I think, the next bigger trending move is going to be to the downside, maybe starting in as early as December and, running into early 2026 before more bullish cycles seem to start showing up.
Indeed, you are starting to get late on some of the intermediate term cycles in notes, particularly a 50-week cycle. So that could be weighing on it in terms of limiting the upside in the near term. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at crude oil real quick. I'd mentioned how T-notes have been struggling to sustain any sort of rally, but so has crude oil. And typically when you see crude oil drop, that's a tailwind for bond prices to go higher. But they've almost been trading in similar directions recently, which is very unusual. I actually attribute that to Mercury retrograde right now because it's a very uncommon thing to see in markets. What's your take on what's happening in the energy market? This is a big driver for inflation. I think it's a big reason why we haven't seen inflation accelerating. It's still lingering there, but it's not as bad as it was, say, between 2020 and 2022. So, you think the trend's still down in oil, or are we carving out an important bottom here?
We are going to carve out an important bottom, and I'm patiently waiting for this market to get to that bottom. We've got a pretty good down day happening right now, but I think the seasonal low for crude is usually in December,
Yeah.
and if we could start making some technical bottom formations and patterns in that time. I think it's a good time to start loading up on crude oil investments. I'm even looking at unhedged oil stocks,
Yeah.
especially the dividend paying, offhand, maybe like Chevron or Devon. I think those are going to be good plays for the first half of 2026. So I'm patiently looking for the bottom and monitoring the same thing you just mentioned about T-notes and crude oil. I think this kind of ends for both of these markets. And while we're on that, both of their cycles kind of reverse at the same time
Yeah.
within a few days.
Yeah.
So the geocycles that I watch, show that to be, probably early December. But it would make sense if we get this washout low in crude oil, maybe, excite some bond bulls to make that move towards 114 in T notes. And, then that would be the ideal place and the ideal setup for me to take the short bond position and get that long crude position put on.
Yeah, in fact, I actually bought some shares of ExxonMobil just in the last week or two, and you can see this stock just building out a massive base here. I am with you. From a geocosmic standpoint, been talking about the conjunction, the loose conjunction right now between Saturn and Neptune. Currently in the late degrees of Pisces, but then next year they're both going to go into Aries. Then they're going to start separating. I think that's going to be a pretty good environment for energy sectors in the market. There's been some leadership there this over the last few weeks here. So I think you hit the nail on the head there, which is good to see. Quick view on gold and silver. Really tricky here because you don't see it on these ETFs, but you had a case of intermarket bearish divergence. Silver did hit a new all-time high last week. Gold did not. I know you guys are going to be talking about this on this Sunday's webinar. You, Ray, and Wyatt will be doing an options webinar this Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern. So I know metals is going to be a big topic of discussion, so I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but interesting setup here. What are your thoughts that you can share on this so far?
Yep, gold had a very similar situation to the stocks where you got that big bearish intermarket divergence.
Yeah.
Silver busted out to, excuse me, new all-time highs and ended up making a reversal day on the same day. So in the morning, here we are breaking out to new all-time highs. That high was rejected. Silver ended up substantially lower on the day. And I think, again, you have a market that's trapped in a range. Gold, as you can see, the last time gold consolidated was almost 4 months before it made a new trending move. Ideally, gold would go back to retest that breakout. I'm not sure we're going to get that lucky this time.
Yeah.
I think I personally don't think like the longer term 31-month cycle is in yet. But it could be that instead of this market continuing down to a lower price, maybe it finishes its cycle bottom out in a consolidation, and then
Yeah.
gold moves. So 3,900 to 4,400. I know it's a big range, but I would tend to be selling rallies, in the high 42s to 43 area, obviously stopping out on any close above 4,400 in the front month in gold. And then the same thing this week, we did peak under 4,000. It was one of those mid-morning alarms that you got to get up and go to work at 3 a.m. my time. But it bounced hard off of 4,000. So, we've made a lower high and a higher low here. So such symmetrical triangle formation seems to be in the work there. And until we get outside of it, I think it's sideways consolidation and maybe it goes, for a while. But on the bullish side, geocycles do start turning up in the next week or two. And, they've been pretty good for gold. So, I give a little weighting to that. So I think I would favor more buying dips right now than rallies.
Sure. Very good. And last and certainly not least, take a quick look at crypto. Wow, you're actually seeing Bitcoin selling off once again here. So I know this is going to be something you guys discuss on Sunday as well, but just massive liquidations that have taken place in both Bitcoin and Ethereum. They both made new lows this week. So interesting setup here. You do have some interesting geocosmics. You do have some favorable cyclical factors playing out, but just bulls really struggling to hold the line here. So what are the other markets that you're going to be covering on Sunday, Derek? And what can our viewers that join us look forward to?
Yeah, we're going to be covering 5 markets in the webinar on Sunday. We got the S&P 500, we've got gold, we've got soybeans, we've got crude oil, and of course, T-notes. And this is a really well-timed webinar. I think, early December in that area. So we're almost in that area now. You got to give the orb on these cycles a few weeks. And I think there's some really good opportunities to end this year and get a quick jump on the profits going into 2026 early on.
Okay, so to clarify, no, you're not going to be covering crypto on Sunday.
I don't, somehow crypto always gets in there, but
Yeah.
right now, the five markets we have are S&P, gold, T-notes,
Okay.
beans.
Well, I'm sure you'll get crypto questions because that's always a popular one.
No
So
doubt about it. The one drawback with crypto as I've gotten more active in the Bitcoin options is the illiquidity.
yes. Yeah.
I'm advocating a very tight stop long position in Bitcoin right now. This is probably a good place to take a shot on it. Risk going to close below 89,000, but there's no options to trade this with high implied volatility. You go to call spreads with the liquidity. By the time you get in and out of them, you're at such a big disadvantage. I just can't recommend them. But
Yeah.
if you're, a Bitcoin futures trader or using the ETFs, it may need it may need another reversal. We had the key reversal update yesterday, but it may need another one before it completes
Yeah.
at least some short-term bottom. But longer term, I don't think Bitcoin is done yet. I think the next, multi-week rally should be sold.
Very good. All right, Derek. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Again, the options webinar will be this Sunday, and that's going to be on the 23rd of November at 12 p.m. Eastern. Ray, Wyatt, and Derek will all be presenting their studies and findings and outlooks on the five markets that Derek just mentioned. Earlier this week, we did send out the monthly Shanghai Cycles Report, and Vipka Held, MMTA Director and MMA Analyst, did publish the most recent monthly tech report. So that's all the announcements we have for today. Derek, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Yanni, love being here. Thank you again for the invitation.
All right. We'll see everyone next week. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll be back. Same time, same place. Take care, everyone. See you next time.